The bowls were replaced by industrial funnels. Chewing burned too many calories. The nutrient paste went straight into the stomach. She needed them to expand without effort. They found the breach on November 12, 1954. A massive oak tree, uprooted by a 3-day storm, had crashed through the roof of the Creedmoor Smokehouse. It didn't stop at the floor. The impact shattered the foundation, revealing a vertical shaft that wasn't on any county survey. 2 utility workers responding to the power outage were the first to look down. The smell hit them before they saw the bottom. It wasn't decay, not initially. It was a dense, sweet scent. Yeast, fermentation, unwashed linens. They called the sheriff's office at 2 p.m. Sheriff Lockwood arrived 40 minutes later. He found the owner, Martha Creedmoor, lying at the bottom of the shaft. She hadn't survived the fall. Her neck was broken. But she wasn't alone down there. The shaft opened into a reinforced basement extending under the main house. The structural supports were hand-hewn timber thick as railroad ties. The air was stagnant. Sheriff Lockwood noted in his initial report that the space was warmer than the outside air, heated by a coal furnace that was still running. He stepped over Martha's body to inspect the room beyond. It was a dormitory. 11 iron bed frames were bolted to the concrete floor. They were arranged in 2 perfect rows. There were no windows. The walls were lined with cork to dampen sound. And in every bed there was a shape under the quilts. They didn't move when the flashlight beam hit them. They didn't react to the sound of the sheriff's boots on the concrete. Sheriff Lockwood pulled back the quilt on the nearest bed. The occupant was a male, approximately 40 years old. He was deceased. The cause was not immediately apparent, but the condition of the body defied logic. The man was morbidly obese, his limbs swollen to 3 times their natural circumference. His skin was taut, shiny, and stretched thin to the point of near transparency by severe edema. He had been dead for less than 12 hours. The coroner, Dr. Garrett, arrived at 4:30 p.m. He pronounced all 11 subjects dead at the scene. Initial examination suggested systemic failure. Their hearts simply couldn't support the mass they had been forced to accumulate. But the horror wasn't just the weight. It was the atrophy. Beneath the layers of tissue, the muscles had wasted away completely. These men and women hadn't walked in months, maybe years. Their legs were vestigial, the joints fused from disuse. They were soft, pliable masses of biological material molded to the shape of the mattresses. The bedding beneath them was stained with years of sweat and waste. They had been cared for, cleaned, and fed with terrifying dedication. But they had never been allowed to leave the beds. The investigation turned to the house upstairs. The kitchen was industrial. It contained 4 commercial-grade mixers and a pantry stocked with 50-pound sacks of flour, lard, and sugar. There were no fresh vegetables, no meat, just caloric density. Receipts found in a drawer showed weekly deliveries from a supplier in Lexington, paid for in cash. The quantities were enough to feed a battalion. The question was how Martha Creedmoor, a 60-year-old widow, controlled 11 adults. The answer was in the cabinets. Dozens of brown glass bottles labeled tonic. Toxicology later identified the contents as a mixture of laudanum and scopolamine, a sedative strong enough to keep a horse docile. She hadn't used chains. She used chemistry. The victims were drifters, transients, men and women the county had forgotten. Identification was difficult. Their features were distorted by the fluid retention and weight gain. Fingerprints were stretched and useless. They were anonymous vessels, filled and maintained by a woman who viewed them as a garden that needed tending. Physical evidence suggests the subjects entered voluntarily. The back door of the main house had a sign nailed to the inside, "Sanctuary from the Blight." Investigators found no evidence of a blight, crop failure, or disease in 1954. It was a fabrication, a lie told to desperate people to make them accept the first dose of tonic. Once the sedation took hold, the protection began. Martha moved them downstairs. She told them the air outside was toxic. She told them they were safe. She told them they needed to build up their strength to survive the coming winter. The feeding schedule was rigid, 6 times a day. A nutrient paste delivered through funnels when they became too weak to chew. The beds were modified. The frames were reinforced with steel piping to support the increasing load. The mattresses were rubberized for easy cleaning. It was a clinical operation. There was no sadism in the setup, only a terrifying, efficient nurturing. She loved them to death. Literally. Forensic analysis of the food preparation area revealed the scale of the operation. The mixers showed wear patterns consistent with decade-long use. The wooden spoons were worn down to nubs. This wasn't a recent madness. Martha Creedmoor had been operating this facility since the war. On November 14, investigators cleared the debris from the far wall of the dormitory. They found a door painted the same gray as the concrete. It was locked from the outside. Inside was a supply room. It contained stacks of linens, folded with military precision. And on the shelves, rows of personal effects. Wallets, watches, wedding rings, spectacles. Each item was tagged with a date and a location, found on Route 23, 1951, bus station 1953. These were the lives they left behind. But the count didn't match. There were 47 tags. There were only 11 beds in the main room. The discrepancy triggered a secondary search. If 36 people had died before the current 11, where were they? The property was 70 acres of dense forest and limestone ridges. The ground was frozen. Digging was impossible. They had to look for disturbances in the landscape. They found the answer in the hallway connecting the dormitory to the supply room. It was a simple artifact, domestic and terrifying. A wooden board mounted to the wall. It looked like a growth chart used to measure height. But the markings weren't for height. The notches were labeled with weights: 150, 200, 300, 400. Beside each notch, dead names were carved into the wood: Subject 4, Traveler, Blue Suit. The names climbed the board, reaching higher and higher weights. The highest mark was 480 pounds. The wood was worn smooth around the higher numbers. Martha had run her fingers over them, admiring the progress, celebrating the growth. This was her metric of success. Not survival, but mass. The more they weighed, the safer they were. The more she had saved them. But the chart revealed a pattern. The names stopped abruptly. Traveler reached 350 pounds. Then the carvings ceased. Blue Suit made it to 400. The chart was a timeline of failure. The human heart has limits. Martha pushed them until those limits broke. On November 15, a deputy noticed a depression in the earth near the old well 50 yards from the house. The soil was loose. The vegetation was different there. They brought in excavators. At a depth of 4 feet, the shovel hit limestone. Then it hit something softer. It wasn't a mass grave. It was a series of individual trenches. The bodies were wrapped in heavy canvas tarps, preserved by the lime-rich soil and the cold. They were arranged in rows, just like the beds. Even in death, Martha maintained order. The exhumation took 3 days. The remains confirmed the timeline on the growth chart. The skeletal structure showed severe stress fractures. The bones of the legs were bowed outward, warped by the burden of the flesh they once carried. Rib cages were expanded, permanently altered by the pressure of internal organs. Dr. Garrett noted that several of the earlier remains showed signs of primitive medical intervention. Splints made of household wood, bandages hardened with plaster. Martha had tried to fix the damage she caused. When their legs broke under their own weight, she didn't stop feeding them. She splinted them and kept going. The sanctuary was a closed loop. Martha Creedmoor intercepted the vulnerable, promised them safety, and then loved them until their bodies collapsed. The current 11 subjects were just the latest generation. The cycle had been running for 12 years. Evidence in the main house suggested Martha lived a frugal life. She spent almost nothing on herself. Every dollar went into the basement. The coal bill alone was astronomical. She kept the dormitory at a constant 75 degrees. She wanted them warm. She wanted them comfortable. A collection of photographs was found in a shoebox under Martha's bed. They weren't of the subjects. They were of the meals. Turkeys, hams, massive cakes, tables groaning under the weight of food. It was a fetishization of sustenance. To her, food was the only language of care. The police interviewed the delivery driver who brought the supplies. He claimed he never saw anyone but Martha. He assumed she ran a boarding house for minors. He never asked why the orders included gallons of heavy cream and cases of lard. The cash was always waiting in an envelope on the porch. Toxicology reports on the 11 subjects came back on November 20. The sedative levels were lethal for a normal person. These men and women had built up a tolerance over months. They were chemically restrained, existing in a twilight state between sleep and feeding. They likely felt no pain. They likely felt nothing at all. One anomaly remained. The date on the growth chart for the most recent entry was November 11, the day before the storm. It listed subject 11 at 390 pounds. Martha had checked on them hours before she died. She was carrying a tray of tonic when she fell. The shattered glass from the tonic bottles was found near her body. She died trying to feed them. The dedication was absolute. She didn't flee the storm. She went down into the hole to ensure her subjects were fed. Investigators found a sealed section of the basement behind the furnace. It was blocked by a stack of cinder blocks. When they removed the barrier, they found a single room. It was different from the dormitory. It had only one bed, and it was empty. The bed frame in this hidden room was reinforced with industrial steel beams, much stronger than the others. There were restraints, but they were padded with velvet. High-quality fabric, expensive. This wasn't for a transient. This was for someone special. On the wall of this room, a separate growth chart was carved directly into the plaster. One name, Thomas. The starting date was 1942. The final date was 1945. The final weight listed was 512 pounds. Thomas Creedmoor was Martha's husband. His death certificate in 1945 listed heart failure. The casket had been closed. The town assumed it was grief. The evidence suggested it was the prototype. Thomas hadn't died of natural causes. He was the first experiment. The proof was in the closet of the hidden room. A suit, custom-tailored with a waist measurement of 70 inches. Martha had practiced on her husband. When he died, she needed to fill the void. The 11 subjects in the main dormitory were replacements. Substitutes for the husband she had loved to death. She was trying to recreate him over and over again, searching for the perfect vessel that could survive her care. The final count of bodies recovered from the property was 48. 47 transients and Thomas Creedmoor, whose grave was exhumed and confirmed to contain a skeleton with the same catastrophic deformities as the others. The wooden growth chart was removed as evidence. It remains in the basement of the Harlan County Courthouse. The names carved into it are the only memorial these people ever received. A timeline of expansion and extinction. The discovery silenced the community. Neighbors realized the smoke from Martha's chimney wasn't just for heat. It was the byproduct of an industrial-scale nursery hidden beneath their feet. They had praised her charity while she was building monsters. The Creedmoor property was seized by the state. The house was razed in 1956. The basement was filled with concrete, sealing the dormitory and the hidden room forever. No one wanted the land. It sits empty today, a patch of overgrown briar off Route 119. The 11 subjects were buried in a pauper's cemetery near Pikeville. Their names were never determined. The markers simply read, "Found, November 1954. They are together in the earth, just as they were in the dormitory." The autopsy of Martha Creedmoor revealed one final ironic detail. She was malnourished. She had subjected herself to extreme caloric deficiency to feed them. She gave them everything she had until there was nothing left of her but bones and the heavy, suffocating weight of her love.